But we're still a little early, but I feel like since we're all here on the panel, this is the first panel I've been on where everybody showed up early, so that's good. Welcome to the Big Boys panel. And why are we calling it Big Boys? Why aren't we calling it the Bear panel, which I've been calling that as a shorthand device for the entirety of the weekend? That's a good question. That is something that we definitely want to explore. And as Steve put it, I told him that I would give him 100% credit for this. Mainly the point of this panel is to describe our relationship to not just bigger bodies, body positivity. We'll definitely cover those subjects, but also our relationship as individuals to bareness. And as you said, the avoiding and embracing of bareness, which I think really encapsulates that. We do that in our daily lives. We each do that in our work. That means something completely different to the two guests that are here that traveled. I think, CLX, you may have the longest trip out of everybody here. You had to come the furthest, yeah. And Don too, I mean, you came pretty far. I don't know if you guys have compared travel stories yet, but not yet, okay. But I'm very eager to hear your perspectives on all of these things that we've been chatting about on email as we prepared for this. So yeah, the first thing I want to do is just get everybody on the panel to talk about their work. I've got tons and tons of imagery. These guys were really generous with the pictures because I asked them to be. And I'm sure you'll see work that's been familiar to you from online and other places. But I want them to each talk a little bit about what they do, specific projects, but also themes in their work. And I'm sure there'll be moments when we get into the main topics of the discussion where we'll deal directly again with some of the things that you guys have mentioned. So, first person up is Don, who I know is mad at me for making him go first. So, woo.
Ooh, hello. I'm not going to introduce myself by saying good day, because that's Australian. I've had a lot of people coming up to me and said, so where's New Zealand? Is it part of Australia? No. So anyway, Australia is our cousin. We're across the Cook Strait, and it's a small place. I think you've heard of Lord of the Rings, Middle Earth. That's where it's filmed. So,
who were you in that movie?
I was one of the exotic hobbits. Well, not an orc or anything, but I'm very pleased to be here. Very excited to talk about this particular issue or topic because of the fact that my work as D3 Doodles, as you can see, it revolves around bear bodies. I don't want, like Ed was saying, I really don't want to just limit up to the word bear because it's chub, it's bear, it's interracial, it runs across a gamut of physicalness. Now, if you look at me, I don't fit into the category of the bear because according to the rules, I am smooth, I don't have a big girth, and I don't carry myself in the visual tropes such as a plaid shirt or surf shorts. But I want to also, in my work, I've tried to be as inclusive as I can because I have spoken with other individuals who feel the same. Even though the original tenet of the bear movement is to be all-inclusive, I believe that the bear mentality are starting to exclude and marginalize some people. So I just, in my artwork, we also talk about, I wanted to also address the issue of embracing the feminine because according, again, to the bear rule, is that it valorizes masculinity. And in my work, I want to feature why can't we have fun? In our last Pride Parade in Auckland, the bears got dressed up as glittery unicorns. We had a segment of the bear community giving us crap about it, saying that how can you call yourselves bears if you dress up in pink and glitter? So that is also another issue that I wanted to talk about. But on the flip side, I wanted to talk about bear identity as a wholesome, all-inclusive, not just in physicalness, but also in mentality. The work that I present through D3 Doodles is to not to titillate. It's not to excite sexually. It is erotic, but there is a message that I want to convey with it. So it's colorful. I try to integrate different ethnic groups throughout, and hopefully it speaks to more than just a white dominant portion of the colorful bear community. So thank you.
Cool. Yeah. And next is CLX, and you are credited there, but it's in the one time I didn't put it in the middle. So, yeah.
Thank you. So, hi everybody. I'm CLX. I come from France, and I used to live in Paris, but now I live in La Réunion Island. It's for Southeast Africa. It's close to that. And I'm a former graphic designer, and I started like kind of lately to draw comics in 2010, 2010. And I started. I had an old project in my background. This is what I do. It's a comic strip of bear friends. They are kind of always sitting in a bar, not here, obviously, and have beers and have fun. The main character, Barry, is I don't know if the pun works in English, but in France, a bear is an ours, the animal, and we have an expression about the ours. It's someone who's very angry and cynical and in his cave, you know. And I wanted to depict my main character a bit like this. So he's always having fun about either other character, and I explained it with some other character really different. And what's important during the process is that in my professional life, I had the chance to work in the Paris LGBT Center for 5 years, and it really opened my eyes and my spirit to the variety of the LGBT community, and that leads directly into the characters, because it made me introduce transgender character. It's Shirley, you see here, a black woman, a black transgender woman, and the Barry's sister, which is called Sis. We never know her real name, which is bisexual, and it's characters or gender or sexual orientations that at first, when I thought about the comics, they didn't occur necessarily to me, and even in the stories of the comic book, some came from this amazing experience I had in the LGBT center. And it's not from the. I show here some other works because I intend to introduce new characters, like Asian characters and black characters. They pop up as a guest in the comic, but I'd like to introduce them as new characters for the following book. That's it.
Thank you. Is E. Salvador Hernandez.
Hello, everyone. I'm E. Salvador Hernandez, or you could just call me Sal. And I am the curator for Kumalicious. It's an art brand and traveling art exhibition that focuses on the it focuses on the allure and beauty of queer, bigger men of color inspired by gay Japanese manga. And what else? There I am. Look at me with my Jiraiya tank top. So I think I'm the only non-comic book illustrator / writer on this panel, and I was a little bit nervous about it, but I'm not so much anymore.
Good. There's no reason you should be. I understand what you're saying, and I come from the fine arts world too, but I was particularly drawn by this image because you're using some of the language of comics that I think we all use, definitely.
Oh, thank you. My background, let's see, I went to art school. I got a BA in art education and a BFA in printmaking from Cal State Long Beach down in the Los Angeles area. A lot of my curatorial practice has been self-taught. I remember seeing folks going through museum studies programs, and I was just like, how y'all get into that? And they were just like, you just find things that you're really passionate about, you create shows around it, you select artwork for it, and that's how you get into it. So a lot of the stuff that a lot of my earlier work has to do with examining issues of masculinity and male bodies by using like non-local color or in-your-face queer imagery. And what? Oh yeah, so I identify as genderqueer, and I'm also, I think one of the interesting things is like, whereas on panels like this, like I've usually seen folks that are, that identify as men, that identify as masculine, taking a look at masculinity. For me, it's, someone who doesn't identify as a man and doesn't identify as masculine, taking a look, taking masculinity through a different sort of lens. I know a lot of folks tell me, it's like, you present as a bear, and I'm just like, yeah, because like I used to wear skirts and have makeup on and all this other stuff before I knew what genderqueer was. But when I roll out of bed, bear drag is so much easier to slip into than anything else.
It's comfortable, yeah.
It's very comfortable,
Undeniable.
I hate shaving, I just put on a t-shirt and jeans, and I find, bearish folk hot, so my life gravitates towards that. But yeah, do y'all know a little bit more about me?
Yes.
Okay,
So
cool.
I've learned a lot.
So yeah, is that good?
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Yay.
As your moderator, my name is Ed Luce. I'm the creator of Wubbable Oaf, which at conventions, for people that aren't familiar with what I do, I say is a book about big, scary, hairy people and the people that love them, and cats, and music. And if the person hasn't left, then I start to list all the other things: wrestling, fashion, blah, blah, blah. The first 2 volumes of it were released by Fantagraphics. Collecting, I think, approximately 7 years worth of work. One is black and white and one is color. I also recently did a story for Heavy Metal Magazine that was spinning my characters into more of a sci-fi realm, obviously. That was curated by Grant Morrison, and more specifically his wife, Kristen Morrison, who's been aware of my work for a couple of years now. Those of you that were at the promotional panel and touring panel, I can say that it's worth going and doing signings or going to other people's signings, because that's where I met the Morrisons and I gave them my work and they were into it. So when he took over, he asked me to do a very my most sexual story. There's a panel that's going to pop up later because I'm sort of infamous for not putting a lot of erotic content in my work, but I went full on with this one. So they actually had to edit it, and I don't know if anybody here has the digital version of it, but that has the whole hog, so to speak. This one is the slightly edited version. I have also done a series of web comics, more like strips for Vice, Vice magazine's site. So that's focusing more on the wrestling alter ego of Wubbable Oaf, whose name is Goat Blood. And recently, because this has become such a conversation in comics and just in life in general, I decided to create a female character of color who took over the mantle of the wrestling championship, beat down Goat Blood and took the title away from him. So I had a one-off little story arc that focused on her as a Latina woman, and who is a female oaf. Sort of my first attempt at portraying a female oaf, which I know those 2 words together may upset some people. I haven't gotten a backlash for this character yet. In fact, a lot of people were very excited. Her name is Disastra. And she's kind of a heel, but also kind of a hero, like the best wrestlers. And yeah, I'm very into kind of oafenizing, if that's a word, lots of mainstream characters. This was for a Oni Press cover for Merrymen, which, if you haven't read that, is a series by Robert Roddy, and Jackie Lewis, I believe, draws it. But it's a queer retelling of the Robin Hood myth, if you will. So they asked me to do a kind of homage to myself, and I was more than happy to do that. And I'm really sort of getting into the variant cover thing. I worked on, I did this for Sina Grace, who's going to be working on the Iceman comic for Marvel for his series Burn the Orphanage. He wanted me to draw his bear character, which is, I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about this, and I wish he was here. I doubt that he's in the audience, but he very knowingly called that character Bear. He was, in this case, embracing rather than running away from. He wanted me to make that character front and center on here. That's all I have to say. Thank you, guys. I just realized I set you up. This was not intentional, Steve.
I don't feel set up at all.
Okay, good.
My name is Steve McIsaac, and I've been I think I learned to read on Peanuts before I even went to elementary school. So comics have sort of been embedded within me almost from birth. But like a lot of teenagers, there was only one thing that kept me from becoming a cartoonist. I really, really sucked. Like I totally sucked. And like teenagers are self-conscious as it is, and then when you become aware of what your personal limitations are and you become horrified by that, it's just easier to sort of run with things that you feel stronger with. So I kind of ran away from comics. I sort of stopped reading them. I stopped thinking about them a lot in my late teens, early 20s. And I didn't really come back to it until later in life. So I came out at 26 and I came out as a cartoonist at 31. And they're kind of related things because I took a long time to come out because I didn't know how to be gay. And I came out late as a cartoonist because I didn't know how to be a cartoonist. So like a lot of my life has been about trying to figure out things that are very obvious to other people. And so my work is sort of me trying to figure out what the fuck does gay mean, and what does it mean to be me, what does it mean to be gay, what does it mean to be larger, what does it mean to be anything. And then sort of my autobiographical work is framed through that lens, and my fictional work is me framing that as what does it mean to be other people, what does it mean for them to be existing in the world. And particularly, sexuality sort of darts in and out of my work. The first thing that probably people ever saw from me was called Sticky, and it was basically my Learn to Draw project. I had a writer on it. I worked with Dale Lazaroff and kind of recruited him into the comics world because I knew his prose and really liked it. And I didn't want the responsibility of telling a story. I just wanted to sort of learn how these visual elements work together. But I was always doing these other things on the side, these more personal things. And so when Sticky wrapped up, I started a series called Shirtlifter, which is me exploring various aspects of gay male identity and looking at the world through my own particular lens. About half my work is fiction and half is autobiography, and the autobiographical part was sort of unintentional. I never really intended to be an autobiographical cartoonist because even though I like that work, I don't ever find my life isn't that interesting. But it can be, and one of the things about autobio that's a little bit liberating is figuring out how you fit into the world, and just, it's not because my life is interesting, but because something that I witness or observe is interesting. So I'm sort of an adjunct or a witness to my own life, and that's sort of how I justify it, because I don't think anyone's particularly interested in going through my life from birth to death. And so that's the imagery and the bodies that are in the work are bodies that I think are sort of underrepresented, or certainly when I started were underrepresented in the media, and certainly in gay media. Maybe in even comics, maybe even less so, but in terms of the mainstream, like magazines and photography and films and fiction, they weren't really there. So I was, if you're an artist and you witness something that's not there, that's a gap, that's an opportunity, and so I tried to make work that I thought reflected the world around me. So that's kind of it for me.
Yeah, thank you. Now we have Jeremy Owen, and I just had this like minor heart attack where I want to call you like I get you confused with Kevin Owens because he has an S at the end. So I was just like, wait, it's just Owen.
There's a lot of people put an S at the end of my name.
And
It's just it's a thing.
Okay, cool.
So don't worry about it. I'm used to it.
Not that you wouldn't want to sort of have
surname-
Kevin Owens' last name.
It's
but,
true.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind having Kevin Owens, but the but yeah. Now I got all. Oh
I
yes.
crash landed you into that.
Who am I and what is my work? I started drawing big boys and bears. Bears were very instrumental in me coming out and figuring myself out. Like Steve, I was a late bloomer. I didn't figure myself out until like 23, 24. And if it wasn't for me finding the internet and finding the bear community, I might still be confused and asexual at this point. So obviously that I view them with love. I view the bear community with love, and I also am I can be attracted to the types of people that I draw, which I think everybody at one point, whether they get into erotic drawing or not, they experiment with drawing people that they find attractive. And I just also like him, it was something that I found underrepresented in comics, and I'd see bear art online. In fact, Dawn's I've seen for many, many years, and it inspired me to do that. But I never saw a comic book, I never saw stories until Wuffable Oaf that actually included gay, burly dudes in any sort of situations, whether it's superhero or slice of life or whatever. So I decided to get back into art, and one of the most inspiring pieces of advice I've ever received from anybody was just like, if you don't see something that you want to see, then just do it yourself, and put that out into the world, because chances are somebody else will want to see it too. So I started drawing pinups to warm myself up, and then I got into my comic book Bludgeon, which is kind of like one part slice of life, one part superhero, action, horror, sci-fi. It's complicated, but also semi-biographical in that I put a lot of me into the character because he came about as part of me back in college. We all had superhero alter egos, and Bludgeon came out of my superhero alter ego back in the day. So it's a lot of the themes that I have in my work are self-discovery and personal journey of figuring yourself out, because it took me forever to get to where to get to becoming a whole person. But then also I really love playing around with the concept of masculinity. And in my pinup work, I try to be less like I'll fuck all the time, and more, not that there's anything wrong with that, but more teasing and fun, like old pinups like Betty Page and like classic pinup work where it's a wink and a smile and suggestive stuff, which I find extremely erotic myself, and leaving some stuff to the imagination. But then also that gets into gender play as well, where obviously we got the whole Rule 63 group here of comic characters. And I really enjoy gender swapping like this because, and you saw the Barbarella cover, the Barbarella play on Barbarella. But like, take for instance, Power Girl, because she's got a giant tit window, I was like, what's the male equivalent of that? And so I wanted to keep the costumes as hypersexualized as the female versions. So this I did for a trivia game. It was a company called Geeks Who Drink pub trivia, and round 5 is always a visual round. So this was basically name the character that I gender swapped was the round. But I really like playing with feminine within the hypermasculine, playing around with themes like vulnerability and damsels in distress, but replacing the females with these hypermasculine, burly, butch, like dudes, and it just so happens that they're also hot and become the object of sexual desire for me and for other people. So I guess I don't know what else to say.
No, I think you nailed it. Thank you. Yeah, you got to leave something for the rest of the panel for us to talk about. Yeah, thank you guys. Just in chatting with you via email, there are so many connections that I think we can draw. And even just talking on stage right now, I was immediately making connections with some of your work. So let's dive into that. We just now, each of us talked a little bit about our relationship to that idea of bear in our work. But I'm curious, and I wanted some of you to just talk about, especially those of you that aren't from this country, what it means to be like a part of that community. Are you a part of that community? Do you go to bars? Does your social group predominantly resemble the type of characters that we're drawing? I know that when the brief moments that I've spent in Europe, which now has been several years past, there was this unabashed embracing of it. I mean, Europe gave us Bear Force One, and when that came here, I know a lot of my friends were like, what is this? Because they were pretending to be kind of so over it. But in Europe, they were hugely popular. I don't know now, and again, this is what I want to kind of find out for the rest of the panel. If that unabashedness, does it exist? Do you identify as this type? Do your friends? I mean, what is your relationship to it as a community or it as a subculture, apart even from your work?
Well, I don't know. Where were you in Europe?
I was in Paris
In
for
Paris?
5 months on a residency.
Yeah, it's true. There are some very popular bear bars.
The Bear's Den.
The Bear's Den.
Oh,
It's-
yeah.
Yes, it's really, really popular. And when I mean popular, is that it's a small place, and then all the other guys invade the streets. It's amazing. Everybody's outside with the beer, etc. And what can I say? Do I identify as bear? Well, originally, absolutely not. That's when some friends told me about where was the word coming from, the community, and all the numerous subgroups you have in the bear community. And someone told me, but of course you are bear. You are hairy everywhere. You have a bird. You have in the subgroups muscle bear. At that time I was eating the gym, and I said, okay, so I'm a bear. Right, well, great.
You got your membership card.
Yeah, I got my membership card. And what I liked in the subgroups that was discovered at that moment, that there was the admirer and the chaser, that absolutely different from classic bear, what you imagine as a bear, and that was really amazing. So yes, I identify as a bear.
I have a really hard time with labels. Like, I can't even answer the question, are you Canadian, without like a lot of qualifiers, because I haven't lived there since 2001, and I've been here for 12 and was in Japan before that. And Canada Council doesn't think I am because they won't give me an arts grant because I don't live there. So, like, labels are problematic. So I never use that word to self-describe, except maybe ironically, but it's sort of like an ineffectual protest, because like I have a lot of friends who are bearish people on the outside. They will just say, oh, well, of course you are. And in my work, I don't think I've ever used the word, aside from, I think, in one issue, one character had a t-shirt with the word bear on it, specifically because I was referencing a t-shirt design that a friend had made where it was the Pepsi logo, but they swapped out Pepsi for bear, and that's it. At the same time, it's a useful shorthand for a lot of people, because it obviously describes a set of circumstances and a sort of a style and an aesthetic. I have a hard time with it as an identity marker, because I don't think of it as an identity, and it's certainly not. If it is, it's a shifting one, because if you looked at pictures of me from 20 years ago, you would never have put me in that category. So I have a sort of a studied ambivalence to it, while at the same time obviously not that studied because I don't avoid it looking a certain way and I don't avoid it in my work.
I think I do agree to some point what Steve is saying in regards to labelings. When I arrived from Southeast Asia to New Zealand to a white dominant society, I experienced many layers of ostracization and marginalization from the society at large because I was Asian, as well as from the gay community because I wasn't the desired image. So this here took a long time for me to accept of who I am. The reason why I associate with the bear identity was for its original intent, for the camaraderie, for the brotherhood, and which I couldn't fit into the twink model if we were going to go with labels. Don't fit in the twink label, I don't fit into the jock or muscle Marys, etc., etc. So it complicated matters, but the one good thing about moving out of a very rigid and structured society like Malaysia, which being gay is illegal, it allowed me to reflect on who I am being an outsider, an immigrant. And being a person of color, it gave me the insight to repurpose myself. So I cut off my locks of hair. I was just saying in the other panel, I did look like one of those boy bands from doing K-pop.
Wow.
No, seriously, I look like that. But as you said, as time progressed, you get more and more comfortable into that scenario. And one good thing about being in New Zealand is that it's now a melting pot between Asia, the Pacific, as well as Europe. Because we have a lot of European immigrants. We've got Scottish, Irish, French. So it was a melting pot. And one good thing that came out of it recently in 2017, actually, this year, we had our Bear Pride. And we put in an Asian bear. And he won Mr. Bear New Zealand. So that, I'm really happy to know that that sort of acceptance and inclusivity is in that community. And I'm very proud to be associated with that now. So, yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah, Jeremy.
I'm from LA. Do I identify as bear? I have a really complicated relationship with that term. But before I go into that, when I was growing up, my parents actually, my mom's from El Salvador, my dad was from Mexico, and they always called me Osito when I was a little kid, which means little bear in Spanish.
I was Jer Bear.
So they, it's just like, it's funny, like, so when I came out of the closet, or I was outed to my family when I was 17, so by the time I went to college, it's just like, and I found out about bears, like, gay bears, and at first I identified because I was like, wow, this is cool, like, I'm accepted here because, it's like, I'm fat or chubby, whatever, I don't care. So, I'm fat and chubby and I have a beard, like, okay, cool, like, this is awesome. So going back to my parents, I'd be like, I'm a bear. They're like, of course you are, Osito. And I'm like, no, I mean, like, I'm a capital B bear. And they're like, okay, Osito. I'm like, ugh. So there's always like it brings me back to, like, when I identified as queer to my parents, I'm like, what does that mean? I'm like, well, there's not really a word for queer in Spanish, so I don't know how to explain this to you. But back to the bear thing, like the original meaning of what I knew of the bear community was, it was for, like, I don't know, it was more of a community, like 16 years ago, and nowadays it's more of a scene. And I don't know, like, nowadays when you hear bear, like, people automatically assume it's like muscle bear, and it's just like, it used to be all about inclusivity, and now it's about, like, exclusionary, like, social practices. So that's it.
Like I said earlier, I figured when I was figuring myself out, the bear community helped me. I found, in fact, I've there are a few people that I've made friends with nowadays that were people that I met that I just saw pictures of on the internet or found their web pages, and were able to like see these masculine dudes, these like big, fat, hairy dudes that were gay and celebrated that gayness. And you know, it definitely helped me figure myself out. That and watching strongman competitions and internet porn was all very instrumental. And then, so I don't shy away from the term bear, even though I've kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say like graduated Bear High School, but like, but you know what I mean? Like I'm no longer, I no longer really stick to the on the nose Gerwolf stuff. Though I have many friends that are very old school, old guard bear, and like they have all of the bear things up on their wall. And I neither look down on that, nor do I embrace it. I'm kind of somewhere in between. So
You're
like
post bear.
Post bear. I like that. I'm post bear. But like he said, it's in terms of classification and in terms of like using that word to find things and to also to sell your own work and to like, and you know, without sounding like I'm just using the community to proliferate myself. It's both good and bad at the same time, because you never want to pigeonhole yourself. But at the same time, there's no reason to not identify if you are like, you have all the trappings of the stereotype that everybody has in their mind, right? So it's there, and yes and no at the same time. I don't know. It's complicated.
I think that what we're all getting at is it's an identity that you can kind of pass through. It's something that helps you connect with, and we'll talk about this in a second, primarily a group of friends or, even online friends. It doesn't have to be in the real world friends. But then something that as people who make work, you initially might break to that group, and then things might disseminate to a larger audience depending on what the themes are and the larger stories that you want to tell. And then there are those that stick with it and they have the paraphernalia. I'm going to keep dropping the terms that you were dropping, Jeremy, because you're really good at it. They adopt it, and it is something that you just kind of got to respect. You know, that they want to dress their house up with teddy bears and bear themed everything, and it's because they really embrace it, and it is an identity to them. And I think about people that maybe don't live in such cosmopolitan areas, maybe more in the Midwest, where that is really important signifier for them. That is their queerness. You know, it's not necessarily a rainbow flag or a pink triangle. It's the bear flag, and it's all of the bear stuff that they put out there. I can't tell you how many times I've seen Lurid Digs photos, if you're familiar with that site or not, that have, I think they've torn down some paraphernalia rooms in the past. But,
Yes.
Check out luriddigs.com if you are. I think the subtitle is Horrifying Gay Amateur Interiors, yeah, something like that. But anyway, just to touch briefly and tell my own little bit of a story, I sort of had to come out to myself. I knew I was gay from the time I saw Tom Selleck, let's be honest. But I had to kind of come out to myself in that I had this interest in larger and hairier guys, and pop culture had conditioned me to believe that those were pitiable characters, and they were jokes, and they're always the comedy relief. I'm fond of talking about Zach Galifianakis and how he's meant to gross you out, in those mainstream comedies that he's in. So upon moving to San Diego and discovering Bear Magazine and Tower Records, I had to be like, I really like this type of guy, and everything suddenly made sense to me. The only problem was in those magazines and in the porn I was able to discover, it was that guy with that exact other type guy, and I was not in the picture at all, being one of the smaller people on the panel, and just smaller in general. And I yes, there are dozens of subtitles. There's otters. There's BEHRs. There's lots of other signifiers, and I think that that's great if that's something that you see and you want to embrace. I didn't have a beard at that point, and I had realized I had to grow one pretty quick if I wanted to get any kind of attention from that type of guy. So those early years were, I mean, I felt like I was nothing without this. Like if I didn't have this, thank goodness, I could kind of make it happen. But otherwise, I could not approach that type of guy and be accepted or even get a response. So I also have little dog syndrome, which means I have a bigger personality sometimes and a bigger mouth to compensate for the smaller size. So I tend to be, in my earlier years, very predatory, and the bear guys really responded to that. They were really into that. I was like a squeak toy of some type. So I was very content in that role, and I was able to kind of build and break out of, like we were saying, this identity. I kind of passed into it, I associated with it, and I kind of had to move beyond it because I couldn't be it. And there's a moment in my comic where one character calls out the Eiffel character, who is essentially me, saying, "You're just angry all the time because you can never be one of us. You will never, you'll never be big enough, you'll never be hairy enough, and you're just really angry about that." And the Eiffel character is like, yeah, okay. Just basically saying, you really don't get me at all. So my comic is really about, and let's segue into that right now, my personal experience in this community that, as we've been saying, some of us on the panel, was very coded and very exclusive and seemingly impenetrable. My whole my whole storyline was about breaking that and telling the story of my own experience, somewhat exaggerated, obviously, for comedic effect. But yeah, let's jump into that. So we talked about how, the bear identity was a way for us to make connections with people, one-to-one. How do you guys express that in your work? Do you use it to make connections? Steve, I think, had mentioned that it was potentially, or maybe it was Jeremy, a way to make an instant connection with a certain type of comic reader. If you put in these signifiers, then you'll get a very specific response from a group of people. What I want to hear is how you guys each do that individually in your own work. Is it enough to just put a hairy guy in there? Do you put certain subject matter in there to speak to a certain audience? I mean, what are the specific things that you do in your work that you're aware attract that kind of bear attention, for lack of a better term? And I mean, go beyond the visual if you can.
Well, I guess going back to my themes about self-discovery and whatever, I think everybody, there seems to be, at least from my observation, there seems to be a blanket experience for anyone who is of this body type or loves men of this body type, that there's kind of like you had to be honest with yourself, like there's kind of a second coming out, there's kind of a second layer of self-discovery. Sometimes I don't want to blanket everyone, but a lot of my friends have said kind of the same thing. And for me, it was kind of like the first part of it. Like I started realizing that the dudes in the porn I was watching, like I would gravitate toward picking which dude was in the porn instead of what woman was in the porn, if that makes sense. And then, of course, like I said, strongman competitions. That really helped me kind of find myself. So it's kind of like one or the other. Either you're still discovering yourself and that's another layer, or whether it is where your self-discovery is coming from. That's kind of I try to put that vulnerability in some of my work in hopes that it would also like be empathetic to the reader, if that's the right word, that the reader would see themselves in that character as well.
Yeah, I guess that's great. And I guess to put it another way, I mean, with all of our work, we're kind of holding a mirror up. So you can see that type and you can immediately make that connection to it. What else do you put into your work that keeps the reader there, that tells them something about themselves that they didn't know maybe? Even if it's like from more of a memoir place, like where you're coming from, Steve, or maybe an unexpected experience, or if you go fictional, if your work is largely fictional, what do you add? What do you put? What is the ingredient that you mix with the bareness to engage with people?
I'm wrestling with this question, I guess, because I know you don't mean it in a cynical way. Like you're not trying to say like, well, we're putting bareness there to sort of like get the people, and then we're going to do a bait and switch. And
No,
I think,
not at all.
I think for me, the representation and the content are sort of interconnected inextricably. And I guess my window dressing is like, I think my worst selling issue, or the one that took the furthest to get rid of my copies of it, was 3, which is sort of like, it's all shadowy and there's a lot of boxes and like people have clothes on, and and so like it doesn't, like, thinking about and sometimes my coverage images tend to be either like there's muscular guys on it or they're like obscure design things, and like I like this image, but it doesn't, like, I love the image of one, but it has nothing to do with like bear mentality. It's just like shadows on a subway. And so I think I made, in more recent issues, I have a conscious decision, okay, I gotta put some sort of flesh on the cover to get people's attention, but I do that, but I never think of the audience in terms of, I'm not trying to sell them something, I'm trying to get them to look at it, but once they look at it, they may come for the bareness, but they're staying because I'm trying to represent what people are like. And I don't mean gay people, I don't mean bear people, I mean people. I think one of the mistakes that artists do sometimes and writers is thinking that they have to be generic or bland to get to the universal, and I don't think that's the way it works. I think you get to the universal by digging down into your specificity, and anyone who can't extrapolate from that to their own lives is not someone you're ever going to please with your work, so you don't even bother trying. Some people are incapable of empathy, and I don't know that that's the ideal reader that you want. You want in your reader someone who can sort of think about what experiences are like that are not theirs, and so I dig into the specificity of bareness by having guys, like big burly guys in the kitchen feeding each other salad dressing, and like, oh, you need more anchovies in this, and like stupid little specific details. And people may hate anchovies, but like, oh, I've done that with my husband. They're not thinking about the anchovies particularly. They're thinking about that little gesture of like taking the salad dressing and putting it in their own mouth. So you create a shell for people to be able to see themselves or their own experiences reflected back at them. And if you do that, then it sort of doesn't matter what your characters look like.
Yeah, Don, I was in looking over your imagery. There is some of this identifiable bear character types going on, clearly bear-like characters. But then you have a lot of pages like this, and I don't know necessarily if those images are all related, but this was a surprising thing and something I was excited to include in the portfolio because it specifically eschewed the straight-up bear, maybe more titillating, but I'm going to make an instant connection. It's what you do with that I'm kind of curious about with this question. So yeah, could you talk a little bit about this story?
This is a spread from my first sequential art project, which I did for my master's. I was questioning myself as a man, I was questioning myself as an individual, unique individual, and of course, touching my bear identity. And in this story here, I wanted to talk about the family units that we established from our genetic family and our chosen family. And in part of that, in making up that story, this graphic novel called Homebound, and it's there's a play in that word. So it's not homeward bound, but I'm homebound to my tradition and to my culture. I'm hostage to it, which I cannot escape. And this represented a non-didactic flashback. It's my memory of my childhood. If you know Harry Potter, you know when he dives his head into the blotty ink. My past in art has always been in the watercolor field. And so I took it out and represented this. This is where my primary school is. And what did you guys call in the States? Intermediate? What is it? Middle school, right, middle school. So in the other panels, that's where the present lives. And in this panel is my expression of my unique identity as a creator, as an artist, as a bear person, and this is how I interpret my memory. So it's all very fluidic, and yeah. and it
Yeah,
keeps on shifting.
that's exactly kind of what I was trying to get at. If I was suggesting there's like a bait and switch to the bear bait, that's my online handle on a lot of things. If there was bear bait being presented, I was curious what each of us do once we've got that attention. Like, how do we reveal greater truths about ourselves? Do we put it through the lens of, in my case, music? Like I express my interest in bareness very much through music, through fashion. So yeah, it was kind of like, what is the extra ingredient that you add to engage the audience
Yeah.
emotionally with? And yeah.
I think in all honesty, all of us who is in the arts and creative business, all of us are very vulnerable to our own work. We're very highly critical of our work. We're never satisfied and we're never happy. I'm very taken aback with the words of encouragement that has come from the crowd that I'm mixing with, because in New Zealand, me and one other friend of mine, Christophe Janan, we're best friends because of the fact that we both share the same passion. We both have, we like the same visual appeal. But we don't have any other sounding board, because the community is too small. We're very, very isolated, and we connect via the internet, but that's not very human. Like what you said, Ed, there's no mirror for us, So for me to be able to express this in this thing, as you said, what was the pinch point here? And I think it wasn't. I don't think it's the representation of the art, but what's the intention of the art? And I think you have to be authentic. There's a sense of vulnerable authenticness that I want to impart in my work. A lot of work prior to this has always been pinups, but it's looking back 5-6 years ago, it was very explicit. It was really, huge dongs, and, everything. But these days, I am more interested or gyrate to more the quietness that the person has, the silent, with the art that Salvador has put up on Kumalicious, those poses, those are quiet poses. They're not loud, and I think that's my taste level now shifted. Now, in addition to that, I come from a culture where happiness and prosperity is basically a fat, bald man. Right?
Yeah.
That's the fortune Buddha, okay? You rub its belly. I'm already encoded since birth that in order for you to be happy and jovial and prosperous, you got to be bald and fat.
Yeah. That's great. And now for the cynical part of this whole thing. Can anybody speak to any experiences? I know that I was told very early on that what I was doing was niche and that I shouldn't expect a publisher to be interested in what I'm doing at all because it was about a specific type of gay man, which is 10% of 10% of 10% or whatever. I'm curious if any of you wanted to share some experiences where that connection that you had sort of put all of your chips on, like you put that image out front, was it ended up getting you kind of excluded, or people showed some disinterest in it based on the body types and the type of characters that you were drawing and presenting. Uh-oh, Jeremy's got that microphone.
I've got a
grabbed
story.
it.
And this isn't necessarily a broad experience, but I was at a Comic-Con in Albuquerque where I used to live, and I have you beat for New Zealand, thinking it's part of Australia. Some people in America don't even know that New Mexico is a state. So, but anyway, I was at a convention, and I don't really use the word bear much in the comic, but it's part of, the bear community is part of them. There's a bear bar in it. But it's a dude that's a superhero, and he's a person first, and then he, the connection to the bear community is kind of there, but it's not primary. And I had some dude come up to the table, and if anybody asks me about bear stuff, I will chime in, and I'll, won't shy away from it. But so there was a dude that came up to the table, and he's like, "So is this a bear comic?" Mm-hmm. And I was like, I'm like, "Yeah, kind of. The superhero's a bear." And he's like, "Is that ironic?" Mm-hmm. I was just like, I was like,
What does it even mean?
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know what that means.
I didn't know what to say. I was like, no.
It's like when someone in a gay bar asks me if my Slayer shirt is, I'm being ironic. I inevitably am like, I don't know how, and can't process that question.
I've been doing this a while, and when I first went to Comic-Con the first time, I think 2006. I did Comic-Con a lot, 2006, 2007, 2008. And when I was doing it those early years, and I was promoting Sticky, and I had a big poster of the cover of Sticky, which is two men embracing, one fondling the other guy's nipples. And that was like one of the images like people would see when they were walking by. And there were always three reactions. And the first was nervous laughter. Like they just like they titter like immediately. The second was the flinch, like just this really shocked, like, what the fuck? But it was the third reaction that like I remember the most, because the third was like, wow, cool, and they'd come right over and then engaged. So even though the other two were in my head, the third one is sort of over time what I remember most from those experiences. And I'm dating myself with that. I'm giving a time frame specifically because I think the reaction I used to have, there's a lot more of number three and a lot less of one and two. I've noticed that shift at comic conventions. I think it's less of an issue, and I think there's a lot more body positivity and queer positivity, and a lot more guys who are accepting of the body type and they're interested in the body morphology because it sort of reflects who they are. And since they're not as squeaked out by the sexuality, they will embrace the comic. I actually think you have a lot to do with that, with your sort of militant insistence on not being excluded from particular art spaces or art conventions, or you'll just go to non-traditional spaces and say, well, I'm here and this is what I do. And if punk rock and metal have anything in common, it's like if you go in with a certain amount of fuck you get invited into the club.
It's the small dog thing. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so you're not letting yourself be excluded, and by that you give permission to the rest of us to exist in some ways. So thank you you've been part of that movement.
Thank you. Surely not the only person doing that, and I feel like I was inspired by a bunch of people. You know, we could have a whole other panel on inspirations maybe next year. I don't know if Justin is still here, but yeah, I mean, certainly, I definitely followed a lot of people down that trail. Or as I said, I'm just an ambassador for comics. Like I do the LA Art Book Fair, and someone I was talking to the organizers about why there aren't more comics people here, and a couple people that were around the organizer didn't say this, or the organizer didn't say it, but the people around him said, because it's fucking comics. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm so glad that I'm here. You know, I'm glad to mess that up for you. And then I went and did cosplay all weekend, so that was great. But anybody else, especially those of us not from the United States, like, do you find that you know, some of the imagery that you put out there immediately alienates some element of a larger audience, either at a show or online? I'm not trying to go down the like troll path with some of this stuff, but I'm just curious if your reactions, you know, you get a somewhat limited reaction sometimes rather than this embracing.
In France, you always have to. Well, it's kind of changed through the years, but when you draw some bear guy, or for instance, you make a comic book with a comic strip with the bear guys. I'm talking about the larger audience. You have to explain them. Because the bear community is coming from the States, and in France the mainstream people, the mainstream audience, doesn't necessarily know what is it. So when they read the strip, they see just the cover with the character, and they tend to say, "Can I read it? Is it for me?" And I just have to explain them that it's how can I say, it's a place with human people, and they're having fun, and it's a funny. It tries to be a funny book, so you just have to read it. doesn't matter if you're a bear or not, if you're a girl or a guy, and then they start to discover and experience that with straight people in classic classic Comic-Con convention, Comic-Con in France. At the beginning, I was very shy. It's a bit stupid, but I didn't. I put in front my mainstream comic book, but not the bear comic book. Then after, I stopped chickened out, and I make people saw it, and when they open it, sometimes often they finish by it, and that really pleases me. That means that I even as an artist, maybe I have my own barriers about that. So, but anyway, what I want to say is you have to explain. At least in my country, they are not used to the bear community. I mean, outside of the gay community, of course. And but the good news, it can interest straight people and mainstream people.
That's great. Yeah, I think one of the reasons why that the audience is widening, whether it's in this country, in another at Comic-Con type shows or indie type shows, is that that image that was so predominant in the bear community 15, 20 years ago that some of us have already referenced, that white, hyper masculine bear image is changing. That there is this desire to evolve it and be much more inclusive with it. So I just want to kind of throw that out to you guys. Like, where in your work do you, and some of you have already mentioned it, but please feel free to expand upon it. Where are you kind of expanding the notion of what this bear type could be? Are there aesthetic cues that what do you have to keep involved in that while still evolving the image of it? That people will still respond to it in the same way, but feel like they can see whether they're female, non-binary gender. Obviously, different races and ethnicities are now being represented more in this type of body type. Yeah, Salvador, you got it, cocked and loaded. Go for it.
Oh, I know. So, man, each question that's come up, I'm like, oh, I should have said this. Oh, I should have said that. So, if you will, with me, travel back to the question about the connections that bareness creates. First, I'll preface it with this. Shortly after I graduated from art school, there was this wonderful convention called BentCon that was going on in Los Angeles. And their art director, Dave Davenport, brought me into the fold. He wanted somebody who was more fine art than comic art to come into the fold and like help out with the gallery and stuff. And I remember being at BentCon, I looked at all this like comic book art that a lot of artists would donate to like raise funds for BentCon. And being there, like I would see a smorgasbord of diversity there. Maybe not so much like storylines because it was like just one panel of each of them, but I was like, oh, like comic books actually, like comic books or comic art is fairly accessible to anyone. And then I just learned a lot more. I became the art director for the convention for the following years until it folded. And yeah, like one of the other art houses, comic houses that like really, really inspired me was Massive. And I know the Massive folk are right here right now. Graham and Ann are right there with Gengaro Takame. And they are amazing. One of the things that whenever I would see the works of Massive like out there, I was like, wow, like here's like big beefy men of color who are not like sidekicks, who are not the like, punching bags or like, it's like the butt of the jokes and stuff. And I was like, that is amazing. Like, they were bearish, but they weren't called, bears. And what was it? I remember I did an event with the folks of Massive during San Diego Comic-Con one year. And the only term that I knew for that kind of gay manga was bara, which is actually something that I don't use anymore because I learned the origins of that and I was just like, wow, like bara is totally like a colonialist perspective of something that's existed for a really long time, or at least that's how I took it. So, but like still wanting to create a connection to that kind of gay Japanese manga, like artwork inspired by it, I was like, it would be really cool to like call attention to that. That's like where Kumalicious came out of. Kuma means bear in Japanese, and a lot of people say Kumalicious. It's not Kumalicious. It's Kumalicious. It takes a nice little playful term like bootylicious, or licious is just a funny sounding way of saying delicious. But so you take Kuma with licious, Kumalicious. When I started the show, I wanted to highlight that idea of bearish, big, beefy, chubby men of color, specifically because I remember being inspired by it's just the Canon artist that Massive promotes, and I was like, wow, there's a lot of folks that say this is a really a niche art, a niche art movement, but it's it resonates for so many people. It's I couldn't be the only person that was responding to it for the same reasons that I was. It's and I met other people who are it would be really cool to see, it's just other artists from around the world, see how they actually are inspired by it or respond to it. So that's what Kumalicious wound up being the artist looking at this artwork, the artwork coming out of Massive, and then being this inspires me to create work. Seeing yourself in the artwork, it's just various representations of, it's male-bodied folks of color, and the different representations of it, whether they're masculine, whether they're feminine, whether they're in between or outside of those confines. The other thing I was going to say, there's always going to be haters when something comes out. And I've had, people say, it's well, why Kumalicious? Why does it have to be bearish bodies? And why does it have to be all that? And it's well, I'm kind of like that. And this is my passion project, and I wanted to showcase that. It's just and other folks said, why can't you do it about it's bigger women? And I was just well, that's actually a community I don't know anything about. So I encourage you to start a show like that. And if you totally do, then partner up with me and I'll help you in whatever way that I can. And then there's just some people that are just it's just oh, big beefy, whether it's muscular or fat, is ugly. Stop doing this show. And I just tell them, fuck you. Mm-hmm. So.
I actually got a pushback from the first pinup book I did, Burly, and I was kind of going on body positivity blogs and stuff to help promote it, and I actually got a pushback that I wasn't doing fat enough people,
Interesting.
which was interesting and also eye-opening as well. So that's why I tried to, in some of my stuff, I tried to do even rounder people, because everybody's sexy, everybody's somebody's fetish, right? Everybody is, as Tony Breed's book. And so, and that's eye-opening too. I've also gotten pushback from, in my Bludgeon book, that it's not gay enough. Because I don't have sex in it. And things like that, which is interesting, because I'm trying to make something that's accessible to not just gay bears and people who love them, but to a wider audience of people. But some people are yo, when are they gonna fuck? And I'm it's not that kind of comic, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Don, you talked a little bit about in your introduction, and you have this very specific image here of masculine and traditionally masculine and feminine qualities being embodied in an individual. And I wondered if you had anything to add in under the umbrella of this particular topic.
Well, I watch a lot of RuPaul.
Sure.
Yes. No, this came from a direct response to the other half of the New Zealand community that criticized us to shit because we dared to march in the Pride Parade wearing glittery unicorns. That was the pushback, saying that how dare you represent us as in drag. So my friends and I, we protested by dressing up in drag, raced down the main street in it, and proceeded to dance to YMCA at the end of it without our clothes on. So this was basically touching on the subject, that sensitivity to that discussion. I mean, we are in the 21st century. We are open to gender fluidity. You know, how can we just stay stagnant? Our identity forms and reforms all the time, and if this is where it's going, embrace it. I suggest, you know, have fun with it. We're men, but we can have fun. Why can't we have fun? Why does it we have to be so serious? That's the point.
I think too, in the last handful of years, I've seen a lot of trans men kind of adopt the bear aesthetic cues, aesthetic qualities, come out as bears. I've seen teenagers, when they come out as bears, because there's so much of that imagery is out there, and it's positive and it's diverse and it's complex, and they really respond to that.
Yeah, for sure. A couple of years back, I was in San Diego and I was in Gaslight District. I gotta say, those hipsters, I was so confused. I was going to the bar, I'm going, is this a bear bar? They said, no, this is a hipster bar. They're all straight. I'm like, stop confusing me. Yeah, and now there's lumbersexuals. Oh, come on.
Yeah.
Talk about labels? Yeah, the straights have them.
Is anybody using, I had said earlier, I'm trying to push this idea of a lady oaf and trying to find out if that's offensive to the average cisgendered woman, if they're bothered by the idea of a woman being called an oaf, because for a man to be called that, I mean, at least in the bear groups that we're talking about, it's sort of a point of pride at times that you if you're an oaf, you really, and for the record, oaf is my kind of euphemism for bear. I wanted to not necessarily label myself so that a larger audience could look at the characters and be like, okay, well, I get that. Is that a bear comic? A lot. I say, no, it's an oaf comic. You know, an oaf is a non-specific bear type. But the idea of projecting that onto a traditional, a female gender, I was a little nervous about, because in very stereotypical terms, on paper, you wouldn't think that women would want to be called oafs, and I found out that that's not true at all. So does anybody else, can anybody else speak to that fact? Yeah.
I'm actually about to start work on a commission project for a friend of mine, in which it's sort of a lady oaf in the sense, like I'm helping, it's a comic about this sort of female bodybuilder and how she met her husband, and she's such a bro, like she's such a bro, and he's such a bro, and like he didn't know girls like her existed, and they sort of came together, and like I'm trying to sort of get their romance down to 5 pages, because the sort of whole trajectory is really interesting, and it sort of enriches both of them, because he's like, he was at my gym for a long time, and I had a certain image of him that's sort of been shattered when he started dating this woman, and my image of her is sort of changed also, because she's really cool, but she does not fit feminine stereotypes, but she's all girl. So it's like, it's interesting how people are sort of occupying different spaces. And I think one of the ways in which I'm trying to look at diversity in my own work going forward, because I think I've had a fairly limited perspective, because half my work is memoir, so I'm limited by me. And then the other 10 years was spent documenting this lonely, depressed boy in Vancouver. So like, that's a very limited point of view as well. And I'm sort of sick of both points of view. So part of my movement going forward is like trying to see what does the rest of the world look like, and sort of imposing my own aesthetic on other points of view, including non-traditional, maybe female roles. Yeah,
I mean, I think it's something that we could, if we had more time, point out more examples of this, but there needs to be more. I mean, I think of sort of I'm going to go to wrestling periodically here, Jeremy, so you will maybe be the only person in the room that can follow me. But I think of our dearly departed China, and seeing how beautiful and powerful she was when she debuted, and like Lucha Underground, currently on, I believe it's El Rey. They have, It's now on Netflix. They have intergender matches, which are, women, maybe not of the oaf persuasion, but taking on certainly oaf-sized guys. And in some senses, it's about how you choose to represent power, and power is not exclusive to a certain gender identity or, even body type to a certain degree. But since that's what this panel is about, that's sort of what I'm focusing on in the context. But yeah, I mean, I would love to see more of that. I kind of want to introduce a wave of female wrestling characters that can represent. You can't have one character speak for everybody in that gender, that experience. So yeah, anybody else, anything to add to that? I think we have a couple more topics to cover, but I think we only have 15 more minutes, so maybe we can cover some of that in audience questions. Does anybody have any questions for us? Yeah, Larry Bob.
Hi, part of my second coming out as a man who's attracted to larger men was reading zines by women, I'm So Fucking Beautiful by Naomi Lamb, Fat and So by Marilyn Wan, the Fat Girl Collective of lesbians, and I think sort of that. I think it's a little uncommon in terms of a cross pollination between bears and the Chuck Chaser world and the women's side of it. I'm just wondering if there's any big women characters in comics or anything like that that's been an influence in any of you guys.
Yeah, influence was another thing that I kind of wanted to throw out to you guys too, so this is the perfect time to address it. Do any of you, in your desire to be inclusive and try and represent a breadth of this body type, not even talking necessarily about gender, is there anybody out there that you're responding to or that you draw inspiration from?
Well, I think for me at least, you touched on it with the wrestling, like China, and like right now there's a wrestler named Nia Jax who's a lady oaf, but she's kind of a glamazon, and so yeah, I've always felt drawn to the big body, whether it was male or female, and as a point of just for lack of a better term, gravity to larger bodies, so.
Yeah, I'm not sort of well-traveled in Jodie Houser's faith comic, but there seems to be aspects of I've at least been on body positivity panels with her where she's talked about having this powerful, larger-bodied female superhero character. That's been an inspiration for a lot of folks. But yeah, maybe again we're looking at something that needs to be explored more, especially in comics, because you're specifically talking about in the comics world, right, Larry, or zines? Anyway.
The things I was representing more
Yeah.
zines, although some have illustrations, but I think we've had Pudge Girl Blend for us.
Yeah, I was just on a panel. But yeah, maybe the audience, are you reading any comics that might feature characters that we should check out?
Well, I think I'm assuming you know Maria Yorso, Ikalarami, and he loves to play with gender stereotypes. He has had Lorso, the big guy, Diego, he loves displaying him in various dresses and stuff like that. At the same time, one of his best friends is this dominatrix woman who is not really fat, but she is clearly pretty softy. And she's also meant to be a very positive character in the comic.
I can't believe I just thought of this now, but I think the dominant force of body positivity for women in comics over the last 30 years is also probably the best comic of the last 30 years, which is Locust by Jaime Hernandez and Maggie Chescarillo.
Oh God, yeah. See,
Maggie Chescarillo was skinny punk rock teenage girl, and he said she did not become Maggie until she started blowing through her jeans around issue 15, 16 of that series, and she's a big, full-bodied Latino woman, and that's who she is.
And there's a whole wrestling. Jaime Hernandez has done whole wrestling tangents about that. Yeah,
and Gilbert Hernandez, female bodybuilders featured, powerfully throughout, the Palomar stories and the Luba in America stories as well. So they have and body positivity and generally, those two guys have sort of run the gamut of all types of people in their comics.
And certainly less problematic example than Crumb, who's problematic in all caps, like I said earlier on. But yeah, I mean that certainly was some of the early imagery, at least in comics, that were those type of women, really powerful women, fraught but powerful. Yeah. Other questions? Anybody else? Yeah, Tony.
So I had a thought about this idea of the second coming out, and my own experience in my comic, I've got that character Finn, who was created as a stand-in for my husband. When I first created the character, I'd drawn him much thinner, and as I was developing the comic for something I was going to be doing again and again, I suddenly thought, like, if I draw the stand-in for my husband as like 60 pounds lighter than him, that makes me an asshole. Like, I can't do that. So I started drawing him heavier, and in the process of drawing him heavier, came to terms with that being very sexy to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just wondering if the process of creating art of larger men, the actual creating of it, did that help you come to terms with large bodies as sexy, or was it the other way around?
I was about 60 pounds lighter when I started cartooning, so it's sort of that there was been a my acceptance of myself and sort of growing into the modern version of myself has sort of corresponded to corresponding changes in the guys I was representing in my work. So sort of the same thing.
I had figured my tastes out in men before I started drawing, but along those lines, though, drawing and experimenting with different themes in my pinups and stuff actually has helped me discover my own more proclivities as far as fetish and stuff goes.
About my process, it's true that working, it's one part of the process that I prefer. It's creating the character, like drawing a lot, sketching. That's all the other part are finalizing your comic is sometimes a bit well. And when I started to develop the character more chubby, it was I discovered it was really I loved the shapes, the round, and I loved drawing that. And after the comic was published and I showed the character, I was really surprised and in a good way that the round characters are preferred to the muscular or other. So it was it's good when your audience matches what you felt while creating the comic.
Yeah.
I just want to add saying that I draw men I find attractive, but when I first started drawing, the internet was still on dial-up. It was sharing through internet relay chats, and it was basically just result of my filthy imagination. And I had this friend over in the States, and which I start sharing my drawings with, and then it got leaked out. And a publisher a magazine contacted me and said, could you draw something for us? And I have to admit, there is some semblance of truth. Having to draw that became the aesthetic that I felt comfortable with, and I felt admiration for. I was erotically drawn, pun intended, into that sort of thing. But of course, as I'm growing older and hopefully wiser, my understanding of body positivity is to accept an image of the body no matter what shape or form it is. So, that was me. I actually noticed Anne Ishii raise up her hand.
Oh yeah.
I was
If you
wondering
can see,
whether
I have this light in my face, so yeah, please.
I was wondering whether...
I can't even. You've changed your hair so much I didn't recognize you.
I know, I'm
Yeah.
looking for the opposite thing. My question actually is really kind of going back to what you were asking, and I love this about Steve's work, but I feel like in stories about body positivity or fat positive or loving fat woman stories, there's this back note that all women have grown up dealing with body dysmorphia. So I know that with men, you know, that image you showed from shirtless Joe, if you're looking in a mirror seeing somebody smaller, you know, women, I think most women are seeing the opposite, right? They're seeing somebody bigger than they actually are. So I just wanted to ask what you guys think about, you know, if you have sort of wisdom for the other side, or you draw, you know, influence, or sort of if you're learning things from the other side of this image equation, even though we're all talking about body positivity, we're coming from, you know, different perspectives. So I was just curious what you thought, you know, about that.
I think absolutely. In fact, I started drawing my pinups as, you know, fat dudes as sexy, you know, objects because I started seeing more body positive pinups of large ladies, and not that, and it is kind of a social construct that the burly dude is kind of just like accepted, whereas the burly woman is not as accepted in the media. That's why you have like King of Queens, you have the fat guy hot wife combination in the media all the time. But the fat dude is always, like you said, it's always like played for laughs, or so even though it's more accepted as in the social construct, it's still like the other, and it's still played for laughs, or he's an asshole, or my friend wanted to start a blog called Fat Boys Must Die because it's in movies, like if there's a dude that I'm attracted to, chances are he's gonna meet his end at some point in the movie. So that's why I took inspiration from the body positivity movement with females in order to you know, draw the sexy pinups of dudes as well, to be able to say that it's okay that a fat dude can be sexy as well, and not just and not funny. Even though I do get that reaction at conventions, I get people coming by the table and go, "Oh, that's hilarious," and I'm like, "Great! If you buy something from me, you can think whatever you want." But sometimes I post something online, I post a video that's made, or I post something and somebody's like, of fat people in sexy situations, and they're like, "Oh, that's funny," and I want to, like in the comments or whatever, and I just want to type, "Why? Why is that funny?" Like some of them is definitely obviously played for laughs, but the ones that aren't, the ones that are actually honest, and they still get that humor reaction, I just want to be like, "Tell me why. Why is that funny? Why can't that be sexy?" You know?
Yeah, it's I have gotten to know recently Michael Lennon, who was a creator of that HBO show Looking, and he was telling me that he really felt like larger guys can be naked as long as it's for laughs. And he had a really hard time getting the character Eddie in a serious nude sex scene. And I think the second season, HBO would not let him portray this larger male body in a desirous way. And he was frustrated because Lena Dunham is a half an hour earlier showing her body in a myriad of situations. I mean, I know I almost feel like I'm opening a can of worms mentioning her in the context of this because she's kind of controversial. But he was sort of looking at that as a cultural checkpoint, you know, that women had, regardless of how complex that is, crossed a certain line and larger men hadn't yet. So I don't know if that addresses exactly what you were mentioning or not. Like it.
I feel like everybody probably has a different interpretation of the woman they interact with, and certainly it's not all. But it's just interesting knowing so many men feel too small.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, it's just a very different take on the same hashtag, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Ed,
Yeah.
Is it possible to extend this panel a few minutes?
I know we have 3 more minutes. I think we can go a little bit over and keep talking. But what did you have to add?
I actually saw another hand up behind.
Oh yeah,
Anne.
of course. Yeah, you're doing a way better job of this than me. I just cannot see. Yeah, just start calling on people.
Is there anyone else that has a question or had
Yeah.
a question?
Go for it.
Right over there.
I work in bear porn, and even in bear porn, guys, I just understand that when I use the word race, I could spend 500 words on explaining the concept.
Unpacking that, yeah.
In bear porn, you only ever see guys that vision races together. Even when they're bad guys, it's always a fetish. It's always like cubs, thugs, daddies. Or, you never, and I've actually been working to try and change that, but talk about that in comic. Is that a phenomenon in big boy comics as well?
Well, I think Don does an excellent job in his own work of including different races and stuff. That's something that I struggle as my own, because I'm still stuck in that kind of write what you know. And my comic isn't that diverse, but I do work in black and white, so maybe later on I can say, oh no, he was Latino the whole time. But yeah, like that. But that's something that's prevalent in the bear community. It seems to be going. It's not as prevalent like as people are speaking up and like Kumalicious and that kind of stuff is coming on. But I do know a lot of people of color who are like bears of color that have been flat out told you're not bear because you're black, and it boggles my mind. But then you see the fetish, like using race as fetish instead of being honestly like just in the porn in the moment and in that scene it's always marketed as a fetish. But I don't know about as far as comics go, like how that works though.
Velasco's work, he's an erotic artist out of Los Angeles, and his work has very specifically featured lots and lots of black men together. He's a man of color himself, and that's sort of been the area of his work. And like anything, I think it's I think when you view things as sort of, there's individual artists and their aesthetic and what they're interested in, then sort of when you pull the camera back, there's definite holes in representation that I don't think individual artists can specifically fill. So when there are gaps in representation, which there totally are, that's like an opportunity, because I think you're right. You don't see that particularly happening, and so that's a ripe opportunity for someone to do that work, and particularly someone who can get it right. As someone who's sort of cisgendered and white and Canadian and 47, I am petrified about getting things wrong. Like, I don't want to appropriate other people's identities. At the same time, I don't want my own worldview to be perpetrated in perpetuity. So like trying to get that balance between being on the inside and making sure you're authentic and also including representation. So I think the best approach is we can be more conscious of it and including more representation within our work, but like just in aggregate, more cartoonists telling more stories fixes that problem.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that as well. Looking in from the other side of the mirror, it is a fetish, but it's bordering on the exoticism of the other. Because if and I say this very, very loosely, if the white figure, the white face, the white body is the desirable image, the desirable trope, then everybody else that doesn't fit that trope becomes undesirable. Like for me, there's sexual racism out there that includes fat, femme, Asian. The Asian part no one can change that. And it's very exclusive in that way. And it does open up a can of worms, and I don't think this is the panel to discuss this. But I can understand where you're coming from, because porn in itself is an escapism. It is to address certain fetishes. And bear porn in this regard, if they introduce an ethnic range or variety, it's to address a sense of exotic other. And and if it happens in comics, I think talking about it now makes us realize maybe we should include more racially diverse characters. But I was on the other panel where they were discussing about creating characters that goes beyond your identity. I was actually wondering, can we? And this talks about Ed's female version. Are men allowed to do women? Can we create characters of the other gender? So it becomes a very political issue.
I haven't widely distributed it yet, partially because for reasons that Steve mentioned, I'm a little nervous about it. I have a new writer for Wovelboth #5, and that's my sometime collaborator, Matt Wobensmith. And we don't go too deeply into some of the things that you're talking about. There's no resolution to it exactly, but if you've noticed in my comic, if you're familiar with it, there's a very problematic relationship between the Smusher character and the Bufu character, and there's little back and forth, and there's conversations, and Bufu tells Oaf, Bufu being a black character, that Smusher is being really inappropriate around me. So that comes to a head in this issue, and this notion of Smusher fetishizing Bufu gets called out head on, and the bad behavior gets called out, and Bufu says, look, I don't know who you think I am. Largely the image that Smusher has of Bufu is coming from pornography, but you need to go and take this elsewhere and actually get some help. So where that goes will be explored in issue 6 and 7, but it's something that I've sort of worried a little bit about portraying characters of color, and I haven't gotten any negative feedback from it yet, but I have only about 40 issues of it out there, so if there has been some blowback, it probably hasn't reached me yet because it hasn't broken wide, but I think that just getting some of the Salvador
I was going to say brace for impact.
Yeah, and Matt has told me people are going to have problems with it. Just be ready. Yeah, just be ready for it.
Well, there's always going to be somebody that's going to have a problem with something. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I pulled from that other panel about writing outside your own experience is when you get the critique, be respectful of it, address it, absorb it, and if it's off base, other people will come into your defense as well. Mm-hmm. So the fine line of be courageous, and because representation is very important, but it's also tricky if you're not part of that group. But I'm always reminded of the story about Charles Schulz and the first time he put Franklin in a comic, which I don't want to spend time on that, but if you haven't read that, go look it up. It's that I've taken that to heart, and in my own experience trying to diversify the stuff that I work with too. So.
Oh, can I say something? Mm-hmm. Can I say something?
Yeah.
So in curating Kumalicious and coming up with I don't actually create any of the imagery. The only thing I ever created was the Kimoji of the little bear with the on top of the logo Kumalicious. But in curating Kumalicious, one of the things that I'm very, very careful about doing is the show itself is, queer, bigger men of color inspired by gay Japanese manga. One of the things, when we get submissions, I want it to be images that celebrate the allure and beauty of bigger men of color. Sometimes there's some images that come in where I'm just it's borderline racism or outright racism, or there's a white bearish character dominating a person of color. That's not gonna fly with us. That kind of shit is just so outdated. I understand, there's some, stuff where there's some relationships, domination and submission and stuff, but yeah, it's just like sometimes I'm just like, yeah, we don't have enough information to tell that in just like one panel. So I try to be I'm very conscious of that. Also, Kumalicious has drink and draw fundraisers here in the city. Blick Art Materials is our sponsor.
That's so great. That's awesome.
Thank you. I mean, thank them. They're really great. So we have these drink and draws, and one of the things that we did at the drink and draws, we're like, okay, like we want to have like the men of Kumalicious. We wanted it to be like the men from the artwork popping out of the art and actually posing for people to draw them. And then we had a bunch of like, it's like bearish white dudes that wanted to be a part of it too. And I had a struggle at first about that, but then I was like, you know what? Like, I want Kumalicious to be as inclusive as possible. So as long as we have like, it's like big, beefy, muscular, chubby men of color and the men who love them, at the, it's like posing, then like, it's all good. Like, so we do that. At like the drink and draws, we have, queer bigger men of color and the men who love them. And then for the artwork, it's specific to like, queer bigger men of color. And if there is a white dude in the artwork, we always make sure that it's going to be, a non-problematic relationship with another person of color. And even then, like we still get haters who are like, well, this and that. And I'm just like, all right, let's go out for coffee and talk about it. Or, after a while, if they just won't let up, it's like, okay, I need to talk to people that are serious about this, that aren't going to call me on shit. So, God, yeah, I don't want to open up another can of worms on that. But
Well, on that note, thank you guys for coming here and spending this time with us and answering such questions. And thank you to the panel. This is really great.